What's your favorite conspiracy theory?
This one's going to open a can of worms.
Let's open it.
My favorite conspiracy theory is that the Canadian gray wolves were not present here in Wallowa County
Okay.
prior to European
Okay.
colonization.
Let's talk through it. These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. Four years ago, I bought a new truck for the first time ever, and I was so excited. It was incredible. It smelled good. It felt good. I wasn't constantly afraid of breaking down, It was awesome. But after I drove it for a couple weeks, I do the same thing that I always do, and the back seat started to fill up with stuff. I'm guiding elk hunters and deer hunters, and I'm duck hunting, and I'm fly fishing, and all that gear just accumulates. And pretty soon, I wasn't able to take people with me anymore, and I was embarrassed. People would ask for a ride, and like, no, sorry, man, I've got too much stuff with me. But I couldn't put it in the bed because then it gets damaged by weather. So I go to the internet, and I'm looking for options, and I ended up buying a deck-to-drawer system. Now, this was a big purchase for me, but it's something that I felt like I needed, and it looked like it was going to be a good product, and it really was. Decked came out with a new drawer system this year, and they've made some meaningful improvements over the previous one. You have almost no wasted space in your truck bed now, so you can access the sides of the drawers, and then the drawers roll a full 18 inches farther out, so you can actually access the back of the drawer even if you don't have a lot of arm reach. There's some really strong tie-down points on top that have a 400-pound load rating, so if you're going to haul something like a motorcycle or big coolers or whatever, you can really strap your gear down and make it secure. You can lock these drawer systems, so you can lock the drawers, or if your tailgate locks, then nobody can access the drawers anyways. So I actually feel like my stuff is more secure inside this drawer system than in the cab of my truck. That's a big deal to me. The complete deck system is made in America by Americans, and you know that that's something that I love and appreciate. They've got one that will fit in any truck or van that's been made in America in the last 20 years plus. You can go to decked.com/sixranch and get free shipping. But just being honest with you, they get free shipping to everybody. I also, while you're there, want you to check out their deco line. So they've got a bunch of different boxes and storage containers that either fit on top of or inside of the drawer system, and those are built really robust. I saw the prototypes at an event this summer. I'm impressed. I'm excited to get my hands on them. I haven't yet, but the prototypes were super badass, and the ones that are in production model, they're available now over at decked.com. So even if you just need a place for some tools, or you need a new bow case, or something along those lines, go check that out. And if you're driving around right now and your back seat is just full of gear and you can't haul people around, maybe you should consider looking at the full deck drawer system, because it's a good piece of gear. It was a good purchase for me, and I hope it helps you. All right. Where do you feel like your story begins?
Oh, man, that's a tough one, but definitely I grew up in Lostine,
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I came into being looking at the Wallowa Mountains. Obviously I wasn't born here. I don't know if you know that. I was born in Tennessee, actually, but yeah, growing up in Lostine and looking up at the mountains.
And then there's sort of two different types of folks that live in areas like this. There's some that are just voyeurs, right? They observe the view and they do it from the valley, and that's enough. And then there's another type that needs to get in it. And you're that type. And you've spent a huge amount of your life in the wilderness. Folks, I'm sitting here talking with Jordan Manley. Jordan and I have known each other a long, long time. We've guided together, and we've come in and out of each other's professions periodically throughout our lives. But Jordan has spent more time in the wilderness than just about anybody I know. maybe more than anybody. So when did you start actually getting into the wilderness?
So, you've probably read Fred Barstad's book, The Guide to Hiking the Eagle Cap Wilderness.
Yep.
Hiking Oregon's Eagle Cap Wilderness, I believe it's called. And I got a copy of that off the shelf at the general store there in Lost Teen, M. Crow, when I was about 14. And I started reading. I'd grown up cutting wood and deer hunting, and my dad was a logger, so I spent a lot of time in the woods, but not the wilderness until I got that book. And I started memorizing all the hiking routes described and looking at the old Imus Geographics, that old map of the Eagle Cap Wilderness, and just memorizing all the peaks and valleys and every inch of every trail. And then it was senior year of high school is when I really started going and seeing those places on my own once I got my own driver's license and could go on hikes and stuff. I started out going to Maxwell Lake was the first place, and a couple of the local peaks you can see from the valley, and I chose to do my high school senior project on packing, outfitting, and a local outfitter, Ed Millar, owned Millar Pack Station, and he was my mentor for my senior project. So my first time really getting on a horse in the wilderness was doing that, senior project, getting my hours in. You had to do 40 hours in a profession or something like that, and then write a big report on it.
Yeah. And what did you learn from Ed that you continue to use today?
Well, he taught me how to tie a crow's foot hitch on a mule, and I use that like easily on a weekly or monthly basis, year round to packing stuff and going on pack trips and all that. So I still use my packing skills and livestock handling skills that he taught me all those years ago, and other people in addition to him.
Everybody has their own style and oftentimes their own language. How is a crow's foot hitch different from a box hitch?
So they're very, very similar. The box hitch, basically, it doesn't hold the load from the sides. So a box hitch, you have a rope that goes across in front of the pack and then a rope that goes under the pack.
Mm-hmm.
And a crow's foot hitch, it splits. So you have a rope going under the pack and on both sides.
Okay.
So it's a little better for loads that might want to shift forward and back, but they kind of work equally the same.
And as steep as a lot of our country is, and there's plenty of trails that are at a decent grade, but there's also pitches oftentimes where mules are going to have to lunge to get up and kind of shuffle to get down, and figuring out how to keep these loads centered is like, that's your task. And I was never the guy that could pack stuff in the morning so that it rode like that all day. I was going to have to get off and make some adjustments, but
yeah,
I didn't do it for enough years to achieve that sort of master packer status who can imagine the entire trail in their mind and then tie everything on so that it's going to stay like that.
Yeah. There's definitely some guys like Barry Cox and John Winans that I packed with a lot they would pack differently based on what the trail is going to be like. You know, if it's going to be an uphill pull the whole way to where you're going to drop a group of hunters off, then you'd pack to keep those loads from shifting backwards.
Yep.
And if you're going pack down into Hell's Canyon, then you want to pack those loads so that the focus is on from keeping them from shifting forward.
So once you started actually getting into the wilderness, what feeling did you have about it that made you want more and not less of it?
It's hard to explain, but I recall going on these camping excursions and backpacking trips and mule horse packing trips and enjoying being out there camping and thinking to myself that I wish this was my life all the time. Like, I wish it wasn't like I go camping and then come back to my life. It was like I'm camping and then I have to go do my life and then I come back to camping.
Right.
And I still feel that way. I feel the most whole and the most happy and fulfilled in the wilderness. And it's like every wilderness trip, real life in between is almost kind of like the break. Mm-hmm. And then real life is like coming back to the wilderness. So in my life, I've definitely strived towards building a life that's more wilderness oriented, so I don't get that feeling like I'm missing out on camping and being out in the woods,
Yeah. If you would have asked me 10 years ago to predict where you were going to be in 10 years, I do not think I would have said, loving husband and father.
Yeah.
That wasn't on that wasn't even on the bingo card.
Yeah, not at all.
But here you are.
I just met the right girl,
You did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Liza's a good piece of gear.
Yep, totally. Yeah.
How has fatherhood changed this?
It's just changed it in the aspect of now I just want to do all the same stuff, but then share it with my son.
Yeah.
And he absolutely loves it. I mean, he can't get enough of talking about hunting and fishing and cutting wood. And he knows more about cattle and horses and deer and wild animals and different kinds of trees and things than, literally anyone his age. I mean, he's definitely picking it up fast.
That's got to be fun.
Oh, it's a blast.
Yeah.
When we're driving down the road and he's like, Dad, you reckon those are ponderosa pines or Douglas fir trees growing?
Yeah.
It's just funny stuff like that. He'll see a deer, and I think he was a whitetail, and I'll be like, no, that was a mule deer. He's like, no, Dad, it's definitely a whitetail. I'm arguing with a 3-year-old about whether it was a mule deer or a whitetail.
And then
he might actually be right.
You got to look twice and be like, oh, shoot.
You're right. It was a whitetail.
Yeah. At some point, you also decided to become really studious about your time in the woods. And you wanted to not only learn the names of everything, but how it all interacted with each other, what the history of it was, the scientific names. If any time that we were on a trip together and I was kind of getting overwhelmed by questions from somebody that I was guiding, I'd often be like, hey, why don't you go ask Jordan about that plant right there? And that was going to be a good half hour of them learning more than they ever expected to learn about it. Now, this has come in handy for you before, too, where it wasn't just academic study, but also like you needed to know the names and functions of all these things to survive.
Yep.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I guess it was 2012. I met some really interesting individuals that were basically nomads, you might say, homeless people that were living off the land, like this rogue band of homeless hippies living off the land. And all of those people knew way more than I did about, I did know some about edible plants and different things like that, but they introduced me to like a really intimate relationship with native plants. And I started learning their life cycles and when you can eat what and what the Native Americans ate is a big part of that, And so a handful of those individuals and myself in 2012 went on a 2.5-month-long survival trip in Hell's Canyon. So it wasn't necessarily a survival trip. I did bring food, staple foods, dried fruit and rice and beans and stuff, and was pretty well prepared, but a good portion of my meals on that was from wild gathered food. So I had to know what I was looking at,
Tell me more about that trip.
So we started out in just outside of Imnaha, kind of in a mid-upper elevation trailhead, and we just made a long loop about 250 miles through the Hells Canyon wilderness. And the initial trip length was supposed to be 40 days, and so half of the people on the trip bailed off, and it was down to me and just one other person, and we just decided we're going to go for it and try to make another 40 days. So I went out for an additional 37 days after the first part of the group left. There was all kinds of challenges. I mean, we had tremendous horse wrecks and
what happened?
Well, I lost my horses one time. That was a big problem for 4 or 5 days, like 6
for
head.
4 or 5 days?
Yeah, 6 head of horses.
They pull a high line down, or what happened?
They was a combination of hobbled out, staked out, and loose. And one of them pulled a stake rope, and they started the 3 that were loose, and then the one that was staked out started wandering off, and then the 2 that were hobbled just went with them. And they weren't very far away. They just couldn't find them.
Yeah.
They were just in a nice little grassy slope next to the spring, just living,
Right.
They probably would have wandered back into camp eventually. But we had some weather challenges on that trip. We were out and we started in May and I went until August, and we had like a foot deep snowstorm in June, like mid-June up near, let's see, where was that? Like Mormon Flat, Lord Flat area. Mm-hmm. And we just got buried. All the horse feed was buried and everybody was hungry, and we ended up calling a friend to bring in some bread and dog food for my dogs and stuff because it was just it was brutal.
How did you keep your dogs fed?
Basically fish mostly.
Yeah.
But I packed like basically a whole pack horse with dog food and grain and little treats to keep the horses around camp and stuff. So
smallmouth bass was a big part of your diet?
Oh man, it was huge. I ate way more than the recommended limit of, what you're supposed to eat for sure.
Yeah.
So I probably had mild mercury poisoning by the time, but maybe that helps with like the poison ivy that I got. I don't know. I got some bad poison ivy on that trip. Yeah.
I've gotten poison bad a couple times, once fishing and once fighting fire, and I'm really cautious of it.
Yeah.
Like, it's at the front of my mind anytime I'm in country that I think might have it.
Yeah, I don't eat the smallmouth bass out of the Snake River anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe if somebody's having a little fish fry on a river trip, I'll have a fillet, but once I learned more about the mercury poisoning, it's nasty.
Well, I was talking more so about the poison ivy.
Oh yeah, that stuff is terrible.
I ended up getting it when we were guiding down there several times, but I think it was always from clients that were like dragging their Paco pads through and stuff.
Oh yeah,
I'm so scared of it. I just stay well away.
Oh yeah, I stay way well away from it too nowadays. But I think that in that case, I got it real bad. I was just going on a hike exploring a side draw, Rush Creek, that doesn't have a good trail up it. So you're just wading through the poison ivy. And I was really careful to, wear long pants and all that. But it just ended up the oils got on my pants or whatever. It got all over all my stuff. And I kept reinfecting myself through my gear after. So it'd come in waves. And I mean, it was bad.
It's brutal.
Yeah. All over every inch of your body. And it starts to get in the soft tissues, like under your eyelids. And just totally miserable.
Gosh. You told me about learning some things about plants from watching what bears ate.
Yeah, definitely. I learned one time, this is also in that Lord Flat area. I was on a day hike during the survival trip, and I was just glassing up bears and watching bears. And I was watching 5 or 6 bears in one basin, and they were all eating arrowleaf balsam root, but they weren't just munching on the leaves. They were breaking the stalks off, pulling the stalks out of the plant, and then eating like the bottom 2 inches of the arrowleaf balsam root. And it's like a super pungent plant, it's bitter and astringent, and it's not good if you just eat the leaf. But in the spring, if you pull those stalks out and just eat that bottom 2 inches, it's like celery. It's delicious. It's definitely something that is good. Like even a picky eater would like it. It's tasty. Yeah. And then fireweed's another one. I was watching bears. You've seen this too. The bears early in the spring, they go right up to the snow line and they're eating something up there. And we always assume it's the tube grass or the onion grass. But a lot of times it's fireweed is sprouting out, especially if it's a burned area.
Yeah.
And there's little 2-3 inch tall sprouts of fireweed and they're nipping that off. Gotcha. And I started doing that, eating those. And it's like asparagus. It's delicious.
Did you ever see a bear eat something he shouldn't?
I've seen bears eat a lot of rotten meat, but I guess they're adapted to it.
Right.
But I've never seen a bear eat like a poisonous plant or anything like that.
Yeah.
Stuff that's poisonous for us is not poisonous for them. Like they eat poison ivy, Doesn't bother them a bit. Oh, yeah.
Huh.
Early in the spring, they'll eat the buds off the poison ivy.
Whew. They're so incredible.
Yeah.
Such an incredible animal.
Yeah, it's amazing how good at getting calories. How could a bear weigh 500 pounds going into his den and just off of nuts and berries and rotten meat,
Ant larvae.
Yeah, bugs.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah, it is.
You're often a champion of unloved animals.
Oh, yeah.
And it's something that I've periodically appreciated about you. Not always, but we were fishing one time, guiding some clients down on the Grand Ronde, and you had told them that squawfish, which are now known as the northern pike minnow, it's not a sought-after fish. There's, in fact, a bounty on them in the Columbia River. We're really trying to remove them. Sections of the Snake River, there's a bounty. But they are a native fish, and our biologists here support them being in the ecosystem. But you had told these guys that they were good to eat. And as far as everything that I'd heard, they were not. I was like, man, Jordan, dang it. And we caught a just monster. That was like a 5 or 6 pound fish. We caught him on a dry fly. It was the biggest fish we caught on the whole trip. And the guys wanted to keep it. And I was like,
was that the trip where that was the only fish we caught on the whole trip?
No, we didn't catch a lot. We didn't catch a lot for sure. But I think we ended up going down to Bear Creek, and we spent 2 nights there because the ground round was so blown out. And we cooked that fish up, and it was tremendous. That was a good
Yep,
eating fish.
it is.
And you took those guys on a death march to the top of the canyon and gave them a dissertation on Sasquatch.
I remember that.
Yeah.
And the guy wrote a song about it.
He
That
did.
was funny.
That
yeah.
was a great trip, man.
Yeah.
Those guys were a hoot.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was trying to convince him that Bigfoot was a relic population of like early pre-human hominid, like Homo erectus or something.
Yeah.
And one of the lines in the song was, "I gained a new prospectus on Homo erectus." That's pretty funny.
It was, dude. It was. But yeah, you often see things in different species that nobody else does, and you definitely don't like march with the rest of the band and just like something because other people do. And I think that that's often allowed you to look a little bit closer and see ways to interact and enjoy these species that other people are missing out on. So we were talking a little bit about African wildlife, and some people want to hunt Africa, others do not. I love it. I could live there, loved it very much. But a couple of species that you said you were interested in are usually really low on people's lists. But yeah, you said warthog and hartebeest, and I've got both of those things here in the studio, and they're tremendous animals, and I wouldn't want to go to Africa without hunting them. That hartebeest is one of the best eating animals I've ever.
And it's one of the
been
cheapest animals to kill in Africa.
Right.
And that's how I heard about them. They're very common. They do coal hunts. They use them for bait. They just shoot them and leave them because they're damaging cattle operations. Same with the warthogs.
Yep.
And so they're cheap to hunt. Not counting airfare, it's like $4,000 for a combination hunt for hartebeest and warthog. That's cheap.
Yeah, you're hard pressed to travel and go on a duck hunt for that here in the States.
Yeah.
So
and they're cool. They just have super cool horns. Cool.
So the Swahili word for hartebeest is kongoni.
Oh, nice.
And they ruin so many other hunts. Like, they're really turned on, and they bray. They make this terrible sound that I would not dare ever imitate. But Congonis are constantly blowing you up when you're stalking something else, and you end up just kind of mad at them. And like, they're a really common camp meat. If you're going to go out and shoot something for meat for camp, it's probably going to be a Congoni. And every time you're like, that's what you get.
It's like those mule deer does if you're hunting elk or something, and some mule deer doe spots you, and just her snort is just echoing through the canyon, and every animal throws their head up, and they're wondering what's going on, and she just keeps snorting,
Yeah.
And
it's like, dude, I'm not after you. I'm trying to help you. You'll have more food if you just leave me alone.
Totally.
I think that ravens will sometimes help me on a hunt, and sometimes they don't. And I'm convinced that elk speak raven.
They do. I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think they speak pine squirrel, too.
Yeah?
I really think so, because I haven't had that many experiences with ravens helping my hunt. I've definitely had them ruin some hunts before. But I've definitely spotted predators, cougars, because magpies and ravens were just raising a ruckus.
Yeah.
And they were, harrying, it's called, bothering a cougar, and that was bedded down in the sagebrush, hiding from them. And they were just swooping in, and I ended up spotting it because of them,
And, coyotes have a mutually beneficial relationship with those scavenger birds, but cougars do not. And that's part of why cougars bury their kills, is not just to hide it from coyotes or wolves or bears. It's because that doesn't really work. Those animals are going to smell it out anyways. But if you bury it, you can hide it from birds.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's funny how cougars, like, it doesn't matter how barren of a landscape they kill something in, they will bury it in something, Sand, if they have to scrape it within a 20-foot radius, they'll get something on top of it.
It's one of the ways that you can get a cougar to come over in front of a camera. You can just go out and take a rake, and you can rake in from a big circle and make a mound right in front of your camera.
Yeah.
And their eyesight is so good, they'll spot that from half a mile away, and they'll want to come investigate it. And You know, you're not you're not baiting. Like, you can do this absolutely anywhere that there's cougars, and they will come and investigate that if they can see it from someplace else.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
New tactic.
New tactic.
Yeah.
Lots of tricks. They're just cats, man.
Yeah.
They're just cats. So, like, if you can understand your house cat well, then you probably understand cougars better than what you think.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, cougars, I have tried so many times to track one down, and I've had probably 20 unsuccessful attempts at that, but I have had one successful attempt. I did track one down one time.
Tell me that story.
So I was working for McLaren's down at Cow Creek, you know, helping them calve and do winter stuff down there. And I was working on some fence, and I was heading out in the side-by-side towards Doug Bar to go fix some fence. And there was this cow that had slid and died down in a draw like months prior. And these lions had been working it, and they had been burying it and coming back to the carcass. And it was a mother and 2 yearlings, so full, you know, adult 1-year-old yearlings. And I jumped their tracks in the snow coming off that dead kill. And I tracked them, you know, I followed the track to the side-by-side about a mile down the road, and all of a sudden they split off the road heading uphill, and I knew that I had come around the corner in the side-by-side and jumped them off the road just because they were walking in a straight line, then all of a sudden straight up the hillside for no reason. So I got out and got my gun and forgot to bring extra ammo, and that plays into the story later. I grabbed my 308 and started trucking up the hill after him, and I tracked him about a mile up a really steep, brushy canyon, and just on the horizon I saw one of them. They'd split up 3 different directions, and I saw one of them just skylining, and I just had enough time to throw up my rangefinder, and it was like 250 plus yards, and lined up. You know, it's 2 feet of snow, and I'm wet, and I'm wearing cotton work jeans, so I'm just like freezing, laying in the snow. Couldn't get a rest, so I just had to take like a semi-resting offhand shot at it, and missed the first shot, missed the second shot, missed the third shot, and finally I was like, the last shot, you know, in the magazine, and I put it right on it and took my time and touched it off and dropped it.
Wow.
And that was cool.
Yeah.
Yep.
Last shot.
Yep. So
Yeah.
now I got one of those, like on my everyday carry, my truck gun, I have one of those like butt stock things that has the ammo
got a little
in it.
scabbard
Yeah,
in there.
keep an extra 10 rounds with me
Yeah.
at all times.
I've started using ones that stick to the side of the rifle, just underneath the action, and it'll just hold 2.
Oh, yeah?
But it's they never fall out of there. I get them from an Oregon-based outfit called Paladin 33, but they're really nice. And then when you're going to actually do that, like I ran out of ammo, reload, they're right there for you.
And you can just plunk one in the hole if you have a push feed rifle.
Exactly.
That's handy, yeah.
Yeah. There's things that and that's definitely started with the competition shooters. There's things from their world that bleed over into hunting that help, and then there's things that's like, oh man, that's making it harder.
Sometimes you see the guys that are all strapped up with all the tactical stuff, you know, I'm thinking of like chest rigs and extra stuff and the thigh rigs and stuff, hiking, and it's like that is not practical for what I do, stalking,
right?
You know, but to each their own, I guess.
Yeah. I think chest is a great way to carry a pistol. You know, it's the most out of the way, but also available place that you can do it, that you can actually hold it. But yeah, some people get a little bit tacticaled out. One of the things that drives me really crazy about reloaders is they're so used to keeping all their brass that when they go to reload on an animal when they're hunting, they reach up and they try and catch their brass, and a lot of times they'll knock it off the bolt and back into the gun, and
double feed.
They're slowing the process down, causing a jam and a malfunction that you've now got to sort out. You get their mind out of the game, trying to get them back into it.
Yeah.
It's like, look, I know brass is everything to reloaders, but just like we'll find it in a minute.
Yeah.
You know? Go ahead and just reload.
Yeah, totally. And it's like if you lose $1.20 piece of grass in the dirt, then so be it. You know, it's hunting.
Yeah. We spent more than that on coffee this morning.
Yeah, exactly.
What's your favorite and least favorite type of guiding? Because you've guided a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, so I would say my favorite type of guiding, it's a toss-up between mountain goat and bighorn sheep. And specifically, I like guiding the statewide, like auction and raffle tag holders, because they don't take anything for granted. They paid a lot of money for tag. They're fully committed to being fully there for the experience, you know. So it's a big production. You have a lot of help. You're not expected to do too much on your. It's not all on my shoulders if I'm the guide.
Right.
And usually I'm not like the guy that's the personal guide of the hunter. I'm usually more in like a scout,
Yeah.
like far away guide and the mule packer.
Yeah.
And I just really enjoy the camaraderie of those hunts. And sheep hunting is a culture. You've got an Aoudad. I've seen you've done it a little bit. I mean, it's definitely its own culture that is kind of a little bit different and separate than your average elk hunt, which brings me to my least favorite to hunt is archery elk. I hate guiding archery elk, but I've always done it on public land with low elk densities and had a lot of hunters that had way too high of expectations for the unit in the area that we're hunting. People that have watched way too many hunting shows and they think that just because it's the rut means you don't have to hike, So I just don't enjoy that anymore. I don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
I think it would be funner if it was in an area with higher elk density, like a ranch or something, or a really quality unit like the Wanaha or something like that. But I just got to where I just did not enjoy the archery elk hunting anymore. I really enjoy it myself, but I don't like having to do it for another person, with another person.
I posted something on Instagram yesterday asking who is the best female elk guide in North America. And I think a lot of people would be surprised at the results of that. So about 10,000 people looked at this story, and the result of it was the submission of 3 names. One name 3 times, and then the other name twice. I think that there's less than 10 female elk guides on the continent.
Yeah.
I think women guide elk less than any other species out there. And I've been thinking a lot about why that is.
Maybe they just can't deal with they're just the same things that I don't like about archery elk hunting, that the expectations and the like machoism kind of that's around it. I've had a lot of hunters show up that say, "Oh, I've killed so many bulls and I am the best elk hunter," and then they make just absolute rookie mistakes and just keep blowing it for themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, one example I can name is I guided an archery elk hunter a long time ago, like 12 years ago, probably more than that.
Yeah.
He was from Mexico, and he was a well-known, renowned worldwide trophy hunter. He'd been everywhere. He'd gotten the North American 29. Like, been there, done that, and that was by far the worst client I've ever guided.
Yeah.
And we had a really good bull. This is in the Naha unit, which isn't known for monster bulls, but we had a really good bull, like very mature, very nice 7x7 bull spotted. And there was other hunters working them. I could hear other hunters bugling their way up through the basin. So I knew that we had to pick an elk trail that we thought the elk might escape the basin and get there before these other hunters push this elk up and get the wind right, get on the right side of the pass and let the bull come through. And I remember encouraging this guy, like, we can do it, we can get there, but it's going to require a ton of effort on both of our parts. Like, it's going to be very difficult. But if we get there first, we can kill this bull.
Yeah.
And I'm talking like this is a 350 plus, like a very, very nice bull.
Yeah.
And that guy did not have the heart to do it.
Right.
And I know that there's physical challenges of being in shape and stuff, but if a person wants it, they can dig deep beyond that, and adrenaline can get you there. And he was not willing to let adrenaline get him there and the excitement of the moment and just crush it. And I actually broke down and had an argument with him on the hillside.
That's
I was
tough.
like, you have got to get your butt in gear and get there first. Like, you're blowing this opportunity right now. Like, heart to heart, I had to get real with them. And he said, "You're pushing me too hard. I don't want to have to work that hard at it."
Yeah.
And so he sat down on the hillside and refused to take another step. And I said, "Okay, we'll just sit here." I set my spot and scope up, and we watched a 350 bull walk dead downwind or dead upwind of a boulder that we could have been hiding behind. And if we had just hurried and got there, we would have got him.
Yeah. Well, it is hard. It is physically hard. It's emotionally hard. Guiding archery elk is really, it's oftentimes really hard on my mental health, because I am so emotionally invested in the success of the client, in doing best by the animal, and there's so many things that are outside of not only my control but just outside of my influence. like I can't even touch it,
Yeah.
and um, it's just it's emotionally very, very hard.
Yeah.
And at the end of archery season, man, I just feel older.
Yeah. I
you
can
know?
relate to that feeling. I did it, semi-professionally for a long time, about 15 years,
Yeah,
and I definitely can relate to that. Like, or even just, it's tough when that feeling hits you, like on day 2 of the hunt, and you've
yeah,
got 6 more days with a group of clients, and you're just totally over it,
yeah,
But the mountain goat hunting is like a perfect counterpoint to that. Like last year, or it's been a couple years now, I lose track of time. 21, I had the Oregon State auction tag hunter for mountain goat. I work with Eden Ridge Outfitters, which is based out of Myrtle Point, Oregon, and so we booked this client, and the guy is the coolest guy. Same type as the original guy I talked about on the elk hunt. Like had done the 29 and hunted Africa, like been there, done that, done it all with a bow. Was an excellent, very committed archer. Like he was into it, and he had just had double knee replacement surgery. And I took him on the most difficult stalk I've ever taken anybody on an animal ever. We dropped over 2,000 vertical feet, wove our way through the rims. I mean, this goat was in the most ridiculous spot, bedded on top of a rim, and I got that guy within 8 yards, and he smoked her super nice billy, and we had an easy recovery. The billy didn't roll very far, and that guy packed his head and horns. Maybe I had the head and horns, and he had a quarter or something, and we packed up all the meat with 2 other guides and hiked out of there. And this guy double knee replacement, and he was we were all on cloud 9. I mean, it was an epic experience for
yeah.
all of us, and just made me I can't wait to go on another guided hunt. I just absolutely loved it. It filled my cup.
That's awesome. It is so rewarding when you get to hunt with a guy or gal that is. It feels like you're on a team together, and I love that.
Yep.
Yeah, it
The
does.
camaraderie is awesome for
Yeah.
sure.
Mountain goats are a really badass animal, and they're kind of an enigma because they only exist in North America. We think their origins are in the Himalaya. There's no fossil record of them there, and goats don't fossilize well just because of where they live. And oftentimes if they die, they're going to die in a place that's really wintry, and as that winter kind of comes and goes, they're just going to decompose. There's not going to be anything.
I've found their skulls that are no more than a year old, and the horns are just flaked off to nothing. The rest of the skull is not far behind it.
Right. Which brings me to the North American ibex. I believe that ibex were originally in North America. That there's ibex in Mongolia. There's ibex that span all the way across Eurasia, all the way to Spain. It doesn't make any sense that they would be like one species that didn't cross Beringia. If we look at the petroglyphs in the Columbia River, a lot of them have horns that sweep all the way back to their butts, and they have tails that stick straight up in the air. This is carved into rock, right?
But also, petroglyphs have all kinds of crazy, ridiculous stuff carved into them.
They do.
No, I mean, ridiculous is the wrong word, but fanciful depictions of animals.
Absolutely. But on some of these sticker walls, you'll see what look very much like bighorns with like a tight curl that comes back, and then you'll see these other things that look very much like ibex. What the North American biologists believe is that that's just a bad drawing that's carved into rock. I think that they were here. Now, we had some massive events 10 to 14,000 years ago, some of which came through the Columbia River, and a lot of our river basins, and were tremendous floods with walls of water that were 100 feet tall going 60 miles an hour. If you want to lose a species in a moment, that's a good way to do it.
So is there any fossil record of ibex in North America?
There's not, but there's also none of mountain goats elsewhere, right?
It's an interesting theory. I mean, I wonder if maybe there was perhaps another subspecies of bighorn, another species of ovis that maybe had different type of horns, like the audads are different than the Rocky Mountain sheep.
It could be,
but same genus.
Audad are another really interesting one. They don't quite fit into the mold with other stuff, and there's some theory that they're the ancestor of bovines. that
Interesting.
cattle are descended from aoudad. And if you look at the North African cattle and their horn characteristics, it's not a big departure.
Yeah.
And where you start drawing the line between sheep and cattle, if you get very far back into history, that line gets real blurry.
Yeah.
But yeah, aoudad come from northern Africa, just like cattle do, and it's possible that that's where cattle came from as well.
Yeah. Who knows? I'm not a record on that, or on the fossil record. I'm not an expert on it. So.
I'm not either. I just like thinking about it.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about.
Aoudad are moving around in Oregon a lot. They've moved kind of throughout the John Day River system, and are even up into the North Fork of the John Day now.
Wow. Mouflon as well down near Madras, I've heard.
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting.
I'm a huge fan of aoudad. They're the people's sheep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's cool.
It doesn't cost you $60,000 to go aoudad hunting.
Yeah, someday I'll make it to West Texas and get one. It seems like a cool trip.
I think someday they're going to come to you.
Yeah. I look forward to it.
I think in 20 years we'll have aoudad in the Imnaha and in Hell's Canyon.
Yeah. Well, I guess we can say goodbye to the bighorn sheep, but that's already the case, it seems like. So
so many of them are just wearing 2 ear tags and a radio collar, and they just are not doing well. I was
just driving by Heller Bar yesterday, and there was a flock of, it was probably over 15 of these bighorns in the road. Every one of them had a collar and ear tags.
Right.
Every single one of them. Not everyone had a collar, but everyone had either a collar or ear tags.
Right.
And they were just wandering down the yellow line of the highway, and I had my 2 dogs with me, and I very easily could have turned my border collies out and herded those sheep wherever I wanted.
Yeah.
Easily.
Yeah.
Like I could have opened the back door of my horse trailer and set up a panel, and my dogs would have loaded them in my trailer. I mean, they're that tame. It's ridiculous.
So something I've been thinking about, Jordan, is how successful our Native Americans were on elk. And the reason I've been thinking about it is when I was talking with Jim Akinson a while ago about like the archaeological sites in the Frank Church, they only found elk bones in one of them. And what I have seen is some native gowns that have a bunch of elk ivories on them, but I know that elk don't show up in archaeological sites here very much either. It makes me wonder about 2 possibilities. One being maybe there weren't very many elk, and the second one being maybe they were really hard to hunt with the gear that they had. What's your take on it?
I think that's probably true. I think that their bows were definitely shorter range than what we can shoot today, just because the inconsistencies of arrow spine and point weight and whatever. They're not shooting 50, 60 yards with a recurve bow, They had good, strong bows, but I still think they weren't. It's tough to get close to an elk,
Mm-hmm.
even when they don't really, in their areas like Yellowstone, if they're abundant, maybe they're a little easier, but anywhere that they're scarce, it's hard to get close to an elk,
And their ribs are hard. If you're shooting a stone point, I think there's a good chance that point doesn't survive through the hair and the skin and the ribs to actually get in there and do much damage.
I mean, I definitely have heard anecdotally that they preferred to hunt bighorn sheep in this area, in the Wallowa Mountains, over elk for sure. And I don't know how many elk there were back in those days. I've also heard that the elk were more prairie animals. That gets thrown around a lot. If you just Google American elk, it will tell you that they only lived in the prairies prior to European, colonization. But I don't necessarily think that's true either.
I have a problem with that one. I think all of that originates with the Lewis and Clark journals.
Yeah.
And they were in elk when they were in the Dakotas and Montana, where they could see, right? But as soon as they got into the timber and they couldn't see, they damn near starved in the Clearwater.
Yeah.
And until they got down to where they met up with the Nez Perce again and got some camas root, which made them have dysentery so bad that they almost died again.
Right.
You get in that Clearwater country, and if I drive through that and I don't see an elk, I don't think that there are no elk.
No, yeah.
Because I can only see 20 yards into that cedar timber.
Yeah, I think that, there's some speculation on wildlife biologist part. I've talked with Vic Coggins about this a little bit, and I have my own theories that maybe that there was a prairie subspecies of elk that was more widespread, like into Montana and Clark Fork and,
like
the
Manitoban
major
elk.
drainages and stuff, and maybe didn't come as far over here, and then there was another species of elk that lived more in the mountains. And you can see the difference, the morphological distinctions or whatever you want to call it in the elk between one that lives in open prairie ground and one that lives deep in the Minum,
Sure.
They're different animal. They really are,
And, some of these Minum and Wanaha elk, they look and act pretty different from the rest. And I think that they're still kicking some genetics that were left over from the original Blue Mountain population.
I think there's truth to that because in the Minum and Lostine River drainages, when you talk to old timers and whatever, and you talk to them about it, they always say that there's a abundance of 7 points and 8 points in the Minum River. There's like a specific style of rack. Like, some people could see a bull on a wall out of 10 bulls and be like, that's the Minum bull, you know? It's got darker horns. It's got usually more mass, more points, shorter tines, more compact rack, darker mane, smaller body. Totally different than the Zumwalt elk, which are obviously descendant from the reintroduction efforts in the turn of the century, you know?
And now in the Minum, there's an abundance of wolves.
Yeah. So... yeah, that's the whole thing.
Dude, I've been hearing some interesting stuff. I've been reticent to talk about this, but I've been experiencing it, and I've been hearing it from people that I trust. I think the wolves might be killing enough lions and bears to be offsetting their own damage to an extent in some of these areas.
Yep. I agree with that.
I know they're digging up a bunch of bears.
Yep.
And the story of cats and dogs starts with lions and wolves, right? Like, that's nothing new. I was part of a project in Montana where over 20 lions were collared in a winter, and most of them were killed by wolves that same winter.
Yeah.
Right? So these were lions that could get away from hounds who are professionals and could not get away from wolves who are full-timers.
So just this morning, I was watching a tidbit of the Joe Rogan podcast with Donnie Vincent, and he was telling the story of a recent mountain lion hunt in British Columbia. Did you hear about this at all? So this was a problem lion that had been harassing livestock and killing ranchers' sheep. And so the outfitter, Donnie booked with an outfitter, and they went up to pursue specifically this lion with dogs. And they followed this lion for, I believe it was 9 miles, and during that pursuit, I think it was 5 or 6 different kills of the lions the lion visited. None of them were consumed. They were left whole. And they also found 3 different wolf tracks that had visited all of these same kills.
Sure. And
so they are kind of putting two together that this lion was killing these animals and stashing them and leaving them out so the wolves would find him. So the wolves would be tied up. So he'd go through and make a bunch of surplus killings. The wolves would get busy on those, eating those carcasses, and then he would be free to hunt unharassed elsewhere.
Yeah, or every time he kills something, the wolves are right on top of him.
That could be
he's
it.
Got to leave and go.
And maybe it just looks like that to a biologist or whatever. You know.
I mean, Donnie's about 7/8.
He's a storyteller.
Grain of salt.
Yeah. He's a good storyteller.
He is a good storyteller.
Yeah.
He hates agriculture.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Yeah.
Because he likes food.
Yeah. What a predicament.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. He must just live only on wild game, I guess.
Yeah. No, I heard somebody talking about this the other day, and they're like, you might see your doctor once or twice a year. You might see your accountant once a year. You need your farmer or your rancher 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Some of the encounters I have, because, I work in the livestock industry full time now. Some of the encounters I have in the summer, like people will be camping and they'll flag me down to complain about the cows in their campground. And I'm like, you are camped in the cow's right under the cow's favorite tree to hang out.
Yeah.
And when we turn cows out on the range and June 1st, and that cow sleeps under that tree every day, and it's her favorite spot. And when your tent is set up there, that's still her favorite tree. You know?
Yeah, that cow's got some complaints about you too.
Yeah, totally. And then the camper leaves, and then the cow goes right back to laying under that tree until November.
Yeah, no, it's funny. And they're probably wearing leather shoes.
Yeah.
It's like,
with a cooler full of
yeah,
meat and veggies and chicken and eggs and everything.
all of it glued together.
Yeah,
by
and wrapped in plastic.
Something made from bovine hooves.
Yeah.
It's like, come on.
Yeah.
Come on, get with it.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so that leads me to another question. What is a cowboy?
To me, that term is broadly described these days. To some people it's a pop cultural icon, to some it's a style of fashion, it's a way of dressing. But to me, a cowboy is someone who takes care of bovines on a commercial basis, primarily horseback when possible.
Yeah.
That's what I think a cowboy is. I don't think it's a rodeo performer, although I think many of those guys are cowboys. Mm-hmm. But I think it's somebody who commercially produces cattle, not necessarily as the owner, but just as the worker.
Is that what your job description is today?
I would say so, yeah. It's more like, I do all aspects of ranch work. I just spend a whole week mechanicking,
But that's part of a cowboy's job.
It totally is,
yeah.
And that's, they're straight up cowboys, I call them. Guys that ride on seasonally only on big outfits, that they're horseback every day, and that's their job. And that's great. But that is a very small percentage of working cowboys that don't have to hay, don't have to fence, don't have to irrigate. Most of us get to do all of the cowboy stuff, and we have to fix the backhoe when the starter goes out and, do everything else too,
Yep. So
the best cowboys are hay farmers too, I feel like, too.
Oh, really?
I think so. I think if you have to you're producing the hay and feeding it to the cows, then that kind of completes the circle a little bit,
Yeah. That's an interesting perspective. Ranching and farming, although they often get lumped together, are quite different from each other.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Farming is easier and it's more profitable, and you get some time off in the winter.
Yep. It's a little more predictable, although there's unpredictable parts of it too,
Yeah. Yeah. I think the farmers are smarter.
Yeah. They get the tractor cab if that's what they're doing, but they still have to fix the equipment and waller around in the ditch, fixing fences and irrigation and stuff too,
I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying it's easier.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Which is the history of our species, right? I think we probably moved into animal agriculture before we moved into like horticulture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
But you know some really interesting stuff about the ways that Native Americans were farming and cultivating. And that's becoming much more mainstream in knowledge that was occurring, but it wasn't at all what we were taught in school.
Yep.
We were definitely taught like these are nomadic people who are hunter-gatherers and occasionally warring. But the reality is there was a lot more agriculture going on than what we initially thought, especially on the East Coast, but definitely out here too. So, what are some examples that come to mind for you in that regard?
Well, I think of the biggest one. I think of if anybody was to Google Zumwalt Prairie and look at photos of the Zumwalt Prairie, which is very near here, they would see that there's a lot of places in the ground that are dotted with these kind of inexplicable mounds. They're almost dimpled like a golf ball. There's these mounds, and they're very consistent. They'll stretch for miles on these ridge tops. And inside those mounds, if you go out in the spring when all the wildflowers are blooming, you'll see these yellow wildflowers blooming in the cobble rock that's in between the mounds. And the mounds themselves are made out of more loose dirt. There's less like cobble rock. So all the loose dirt is mounded up and has deep soil. And then in between the mounds is like really very rocky, sandy soil. And in that rocky, sandy soil in between the mounds, there's yellow flowers, which is the Lomatium genus, which is also called biscuit root, which is one of the most important staple roots of the Columbia Plateau tribes. And then up a little bit further on the mounds, you get into onions, camas, brodia, various different kinds of lily family stuff that is all edible that grows on top of these mounds. And I don't think it's an accident. I think, people have lived here for 15,000 years. I think that it's not an accident that there's this like hyper abundance of these food species so concentrated in these mound areas. And it's the Nez Perce elders, from what I've heard, some of them say that they're intentional. These mounds were created by thousands of years of people moving that soil into mounds, and it's helped by the meltwater runs in between the mounds and freezes, and it brings the rock to the surface. It makes the rocks easier to kind of orient in a certain way. So it's a combination of human and regular climatic things that make these mounds, but it's no accident the abundance of these edible plants that live in these mounds. So it's like similar to the Incas would terrace the hillsides in Peru to grow potatoes. It's totally similar. And this is a lot of speculation on my part, but I think more and more evidence is going to come out that these widespread, abundant mound structures out on these prairies have more of a human-made influence than just being a totally natural occurrence.
So when I built this place, I learned something fascinating about these mounds, because I've got them here. We've got them on the other side of the highway, kind of on the north side of the Six Ranch. And I learned it when I was digging test pits for my septic drain field, right? And the mounds that we're talking about, folks, are, I don't know, at most 18 inches above ground level from like the rocky areas next to them. And they are perfectly circular. Here's the crazy thing, Jordan. If we go to the cobbly stuff, I can dig down maybe 6 inches before I hit hard rock. If I move 3 or 4 feet to the right to where I'm in that mound and dig down, I'm digging down 6 feet before I'm hitting a rock. And it could be deeper than that.
Yeah.
But they are buckets in some of the hardest rock that there is. And I would love to know how this was created. There's bigger versions of it up in potholes in Washington where they think that during the Missoula floods, which were, folks, the Missoula floods were 6 times greater than all of the rivers of the world combined at once, right? It was a huge amount of water, and there were whirlpools that occurred, and they think that boulders would get down into these whirlpools and circle, and they would auger holes into the ground. I wonder if that wasn't happening here at some point.
Yeah, it's possible. I know that there's some of the theories, geologists have about these are that there was like ice sheets, not seasonal ice sheets, not like glaciers, but like seasonal ice sheets on these flat prairie areas that took a long time to melt. And snow melt has like a cupped appearance, if it's on flat ground. And that as that snow progressed into summer and became hard pack and had these cupped that the certain parts of the cups would melt out, before the others, and that had something to do with creating that structure. Yeah. But there's no denying that they're very important gardens, you might call them,
absolutely.
For the Nez Perce. I mean, it's ancient, sacred, ancestral food source. It's widely used to this day by our local Nez Perce Cayuse Umatilla tribe.
And they're exactly the places that I use for gardens today.
Yeah.
Right? So when I plant my orchard down here, I pick a mound to do it in. This spring where I'm going to find more places to plant potatoes because I didn't plant enough spuds last year.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick mounds to do it in. And you really can't appreciate it until you get in the air. And you look at it from satellite, you look at it from a drone, from an airplane, and they're just so evenly dispersed. It's incredible.
So I think the official geologist term for these mounds is Mima Mounds, named after, I believe, a town in Washington. So if a listener is interested in looking at pictures, just Google Mima Mounds.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, it's cool.
What's your favorite conspiracy theory?
This one's going to open a can of worms.
Let's open it.
My favorite conspiracy theory is that the Canadian gray wolves were not present here in Wallowa County prior to European colonization.
Okay. Let's talk through it.
We have these wolves like OR7 that traveled all the way down to, Central California.
Yep.
You have a pack in Sequoia National Park now that's descendant from our Oregon wolves. So what would stop a Canadian gray wolf, with big air quotes, from being an Oregon gray wolf? Wolves don't understand, political boundaries. And I do know for a fact that my concession is I know for a fact there were multiple species of wolves that are no longer with us, extinct species of wolves,
One of the factors with canines is that their DNA allows them to express physical characteristics over a really wide spectrum, right? So we can have a Chihuahua, we can have a Great Dane, we can have everything in between, and they're all a dog. Like, that's really remarkable among species, that we can do that. You're not going to find that with bears, right? Like, you can go. There's a handful of bear species in the world, but they all share really consistent characteristics compared to a Chihuahua and a Great Dane, which you would think are completely unrelated. A great example of this is last week I was in North Carolina, in eastern North Carolina. I was duck and quail hunting, had a wonderful time, tremendous experience. But they have some red wolves there that have been reintroduced. Big project, tons and tons of money. And they have now collared every single red wolf.
Wow.
Right? So I think they've got 74 or 75 head of them, something like that. But they're saying every single one of them is wearing an orange collar. And part of the initiative in doing that is because they also have coyotes, which are new to the area. Now, I was down there in December and killed a coyote that looked unlike any other coyote I've ever seen in my life.
I see that all the time, just social media, Facebook groups of trapping groups.
Yep.
And in the East, they posted pictures of these coyotes. If I killed that coyote, I would not be showing a picture to anybody because I'd probably be arrested for killing somebody's dog, I mean, they do not look like coyotes to me.
Yep. So, there is such a thing as a coy dog where they have domestic dog genetics mixed in. There's the coy wolf, which is happening very often, especially in this region with these red wolves. And there was one particular animal that was trapped, and its characteristics were a little bit goofy. So they called the state. The state took it, took DNA from it, kept it in a pen for a few days, and they said, well, this is 84% red wolf, and the rest is coyote. I'm like, okay, so what is it? And they're like, well, it's a coyote. It's got to be 85% in order to be considered a red wolf. Like, all right, so what are you going to do with it? They're like, well, we're just going to dispose of it. And these guys were like, well, look, if you're going to kill it, we at least want to mount it because it's interesting. And this mount is fascinating. I'm convinced that the coyote that I killed in December that was farther south from there, it had some really similar characteristics to this. All of this to say that when you have canine species that are similar, they're going to interbreed. Every single time this is going to happen, and it's going to get mixed. So you can never draw a line and say, this is a Canadian gray wolf, this is a timber wolf, this is a coyote, this is a prairie coyote. There's 19 subspecies of coyotes in North America, and they're only divisible by region.
That's kind of my point because, you've heard of Bergman's rule probably,
yeah.
Which is, the white-tailed deer in Nicaragua and the white-tailed deer in, Hay River, Northwest Territories, Canada, are exactly the same species. They're different subspecies. One of them weighs 70 pounds, and the other one weighs 190 pounds on the hoof.
300 pounds.
Yeah, big northern whitetails for sure.
So Bergman's rule is that animals tend to get larger as they get closer to the Arctic Circle.
Yeah, so I think it could be, the differences between the wolves that were here beforehand and the wolves that were reintroduced in Idaho in 1997, I think are the same species. They just, every animal conforms to the land that it lives in.
Eventually.
So you'll see eventually, and some species like feral hogs, it only takes 7 generations or something for a pink Hampshire hog to turn into a furry boar, So I think that these wolves, yes, they were larger, the ones that were introduced to what was here before slightly, but they will quickly adapt to the prey that's available, and whatever, the climate conditions to become. We won't see it in our lifetime,
Yeah, maybe. But also maybe not, because
Yeah.
there's some
There's cattle to eat, so it's totally different.
right.
Yeah.
It's a different game. The
Yeah.
deck has been reshuffled. But when we have invasive non-native species, sometimes they can retain what they are and really take over. And plants are a great example of that. Like, you look at noxious weeds. I think knapweed is pretty much knapweed wherever it is, but if you bring it into a new environment, it can roll.
Yeah, and if it doesn't have the bugs and the funguses that normally would cause problems for it, to control the population.
I look back at some old newspaper clippings from the chieftain, from the trapping records in the bounty days.
Yeah.
And at that time, what they were calling wolves weighed 70 pounds.
Yeah.
But the first day of the first ever wolf season in Montana, I was out elk hunting with my buddy Adam, and we called in 5 wolves. Didn't fire a shot. I was so freaking rattled.
Was it legal at that time? You had tags in your pockets? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
But it just wasn't in my mind. And I saw him, like, we're sitting on this ridge in this little dished out bowl, and we're watching, we're waiting for daylight. It's dark, and we hear some coyotes start howling, and then we heard wolves howl. First time we'd ever heard them in our lives.
That's amazing.
It was
it's
awesome.
So cool.
It was crazy.
Nothing will make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up faster than hearing a wolf howl in the dark.
Emotional reaction for sure. And these coyotes shut the hell up, man. They were like, they'd said enough. I was like, wow, that was nuts. That was for sure wolves. So it starts to get a little bit light, and look in the bottom, and I see them. But I don't want to be the guy that, like, literally cries wolf, right?
Yeah.
Because I've heard so many people throughout my life at this stage, like, say things are lions that are actually coyotes, and, like, all this garbage.
We've all done it.
Yeah. I don't want to be that guy. So
hey, you guys, there's some large unidentified canines down here.
Yeah. So I'm looking, and then I'm like, okay, 100% for sure. 2 of them had come out at that stage. I go, Adam, there's some wolves down there. And he's got a longbow. I've got a 45-70 with open sights that I'm good for about 100 yards with. And he goes, should we call them in? I was like, yeah, I think we should. So we both start squeaking a little bit, and ended up 5 of them that we called in. But one of them was pure white. This is the reason that I bring it up. The pure white wolves, almost every biologist out there will agree, have their origins as a color phase, if not as an individual from the Arctic Circle, right? So that wolf may have, as an individual, started in northern Canada, like far northern Canada, and come all the way down through the 9-mile country in northern Montana, all the way down to southwest Montana, and then showed up so a couple college kids could try and, call it in. And man, they came into like 150 yards, and they were bombing through the sagebrush, coming uphill. I was like, this is happening.
Yeah, that's a good feeling.
At one point, Adam turned around. He's got his longbow, right? And he goes, don't let him get me. We're dead serious.
Funny,
It's funny to talk about now.
No, but I get it.
Yeah. But you see 5 wolves like running towards you with the intent to kill, and it feels weird.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's morning, wind cuts downhill, catches them in the face, and dude, they vanished like vapor.
Yeah.
And it was so eerie that we quit elk hunting. We went back to the wall tent and ate Snickers bars and giggled for the rest of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely changes your day when you run into wolves.
I just heard wolves killed somebody's hound here in the Imnaha the other day. He was bobcat hunting, and killed his dog and followed him back to the truck. And he was running so hard he was throwing up coming up the hill with those wolves behind him holding on to his hounds.
Wow. So I right around Christmas, right after Christmas, I had four cow dogs, all very well behaved. When they're at home, I don't have to kennel them. They don't leave my place. They've got 100-yard circle. Like, they don't leave, Very loyal, good dogs. And they were all howling. It might have been right after January 1st. Just howling like you wouldn't believe. Like, they're just raising a ruckus. Like, more than they do if the local coyotes are howling, And I thought it was weird, and I kept telling them to shut up, and they wouldn't shut up, this one dog in particular. And in the morning, he was gone. and I haven't seen him again since. It's been almost 2 months,
Oh man.
So I don't know. Wolves do circle through our neighborhood. They've been seen in my neighborhood down near Naha, and I don't know. I'm inclined to believe that he might have been taken by wolves because it's just his disappearance is inexplicable.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's a bummer. He was a great dog. I don't know what the heck. There was just something weird that night.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna say it was wolves, but
Yeah.
it's high on my list of possibilities for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's tough, man. It's hard. It's hard for people to realize until it affects them personally.
Yep.
Even if it's somebody that that has a love of something that will eventually be affected by wolves, whether that's wildlife or cattle, or just having a dog that runs around outside their house.
Yeah.
Like, people can hear that and be like, man, that sucks, and really have it not affect anything about their lives. But when it's their dog,
Yep.
or suddenly, like, they can't hunt elk the way they always have, or it's their cattle or their sheep that are getting killed, they're like, we got to do something about this.
Yeah.
But there's something interesting about it where it really doesn't move people to action until it affects them personally.
So my story is that's very much the case. I definitely, my opinions about wolves changed when I started experiencing it firsthand with my cattle. First I lost some horses when I was working for Barry, the local outfitter. We lost some horses to wolves. Yeah. Just in a summer pasture, a stud and a mare, and it was too late to call the Fish and Game and do the big,
Right.
crime scene investigation. But I know it was wolves. And cattle, as I started getting into the ranching business more and more about 10 years ago, started finding kills, and missing cattle and fuzzed up cattle and all that, and then losing dog, my opinion has definitely changed. And I'm going to get some flack for saying this, but I am still pro-wolf. I think that they are a species that should live in Oregon. I think they should be listed as a game animal, and I think we should be able to hunt and trap them. But I do think that they're, I'm not going to say they're beneficial to the ecosystem, but I think it's cool. I want the sustainable fur harvest is what I want. I want to be able to trap them and get those hides and make some money off of them, and just like they do in Canada and Montana and wherever else.
Something that people just flat out don't understand, hunters included, a lot of hunters. You could turn the spigot on like a fire hose and say, all right, y'all can hunt wolves as much as you want. You can trap them as much as you want. You cannot use poison. You cannot shoot them out of an aircraft. They could turn people loose. No tags, no seasons, no limits. And all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't make there be no wolves again.
No. I don't think if you had all the latest military thermal imaging helicopters and war machines, you couldn't eliminate every wolf. There's no way.
It took over 100 years of trapping, poisoning, shooting, running with dogs, every single thing that we could do, and a lot of poisoning, incentivized with bounties to reduce the wolf population. If we did it by legal and ethical means now,
they're not going anywhere.
No freaking way. So I don't know if the preservation organizations don't understand that, or if they just want to keep making money. But it's one of the two, because you could legalize wolf hunting everywhere, and it wouldn't hurt the species.
No, not at all. And it definitely would. The situation you're describing, when that does eventually happen, which it probably will, because the population is going to continue to grow. The season will eventually be open in Oregon. I don't think that the population is going to decrease in proportion to the amount of hunting pressure. I think that it's going to stay relatively the same and maybe drop off a little bit. But the first year problems will be mitigated big time.
And people feel better.
Yeah.
That's going to be a big difference. Is right now we feel like we're in a boxing match with our hands tied behind our back.
Yeah.
And if you just say, hey, you can protect your assets.
Yeah.
Like, you can go wolf hunting, you can protect your cattle, you can protect your dogs. Still, like, you have what are considered working dogs, right?
Yep.
Because they're cattle dogs. If I'm out walking through the woods with my labs and a pack of wolves shows up and starts killing my labs, it's illegal for me to kill those wolves because they're not considered working dogs. They're hunting dogs.
Yeah.
Same thing with your pet. Like, that is bonkers.
It is totally bonkers.
You know, you've put me in a situation where what is morally and ethically the right thing to do is illegal.
Yeah.
And I don't think people should be put in that situation. And there is something about the wolf that just evokes a lot of emotion on both sides, every side. Now, I don't even want to say both. I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
Because it is so multifaceted.
Oh, there's 100 sides,
but,
you know?
But there's something about the animal that really elicits emotion from people.
It does, yep. Yeah, the charismatic megafauna. It's interesting because you have these wildlife organizations that do a lot of good conservation work that are very pro-wolf. And I'm not trying to say that that's a bad thing, but a lot of their focus is on, you know, restoring wolf populations in Oregon and whatever. They do not care one bit about mule deer, which are much more closer to, like, extinction than wolves will be. And they're doing literally nothing. Not one Defenders of Wildlife, Oregon Wild, not one single dime goes towards actually helping mule deer.
Yeah. You know, they still don't consider, like, they're not managing mule deer and whitetail as separate species over here.
Which is ridiculous. I was going to actually change the subject to that at some point. I think that is the most ridiculous thing. We're the only state. So Wyoming, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, in the far west, the Intermountain Northwest, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington have whitetails, and Oregon is the only state that doesn't have separate seasons for whitetail and mule deer.
Yeah, I don't know all those regulations well enough. I don't know.
Just briefly glancing through the Idaho regulations in Washington recently, I'm seeing like multiple different seasons for mule deer and whitetail that are separate. You know, I think Washington and Idaho both have general season tags for certain classes of whitetail, like maybe less than a certain number of points or something like that.
Right.
And then the mule deer tags are limited numbers and a controlled application.
Yeah.
So I believe in Oregon, we should definitely be managing them separately. You know, there's 100 series deer and 600 series deer. There needs to be a series for whitetails that's separate than the mule deer and blacktail.
Well, and we do have Columbia whitetail tags that are only Columbia whitetail tags. We have blacktail only tags.
Yeah, so why is it different in Western Oregon than here, you know?
Well, so last year I called through the ladder of ODFW, the labyrinth, I guess is a better word, and got a hold of the director of elk and deer.
Yeah.
And I asked him that point blank. I was like, why don't we manage these as separate species? Just a crazy idea, you know, because mule deer are crashing and they need some help. And right now, since you just allocate buck tags that are for either species, a lot of these year-and-a-half-old deer are getting shot next to the road, right? And it's hurting us. And he said it's not a priority for the state.
It's so interesting because, you know, I am passionate about whitetails. I love whitetails, and that's what I hunt. I don't hunt mule deer at all. I mean, if one walks under my tree stand and it's nice, I'm going to shoot it, but I'm targeting whitetails 100%. Every deer tag I ever have, I'm 100% targeting whitetails. And
they taste better.
They taste better, and they're just such an interesting. So I've been running mock scrapes on trail cameras in some off-the-wall places that you would never, ever guess. Like, you know, the mid-elevation logged over timber, like, you know, your Chestnut, Sled Springs, Pine Creek unit, you know, the stuff that is usually just good old boys driving around in pickups cutting wood. Like, it's not, like, considered prime deer habitat by any means. And I've been putting in these mock scrapes and running cameras and just seeing a crazy number of deer living in the timber, mountain bucks living in the timber that you would never think there was a whitetail. And I wouldn't either. There's some of these places. One time I was out driving around and just saw a whitetail buck cross the road. So I backtracked him and put a little pile of corn in front of a camera, and he was back on it. And I put in a mock scrape, and I hunted that sucker all season. I never got him, never even had him under my stand. But it's just fascinating. Like it's not encroachment, but the growth of the whitetail population into habitat that normally is not considered whitetail habitat.
The expansion of their range.
Yeah, usually they're in like a few limited riparian areas and agricultural alfalfa fields and cottonwood river bottoms. But there is way more whitetails in the woods than most people would give them credit for.
And the canyons.
Yeah.
If you took some of these East Coast, Midwest guys and showed them the steepness that some of these whitetail are living in,
Yep.
and I'm not going to name names, but I know you know exactly where I'm talking about. It is freaking incredible that there's whitetail in there. It's amazing to me. But they are the more adaptive species. Mule deer are not doing well, and I kind of have to check myself a little bit because the way I feel about bighorn sheep, which is that they're just on life support, and largely just being hunted by the extremely wealthy or the extremely lucky, and really not having much of an ecological impact on the land at all. So yeah, I would like to see Aoudad come in where we have a food source, where we have an opportunity for everyone to recreate with, where we have a really beautiful and interesting animal that can utilize some of these grasses and reduce our fire hazards and reinvigorate the soil, like all these benefits that you get from having ungulates on the land. I have to check myself because I wonder if I'm playing favorites with mule deer too much, and I need to just recognize that, they're a native species, they're one of my favorite animals, but they're also just not making it. So maybe we just need to let them go.
Well, I don't know that I don't agree with letting him go, but I definitely shifted my focus to hunting whitetails when it became apparent like how much the mule deer were struggling.
Dude, it's so bad.
Like there's places where, in my early 20s, I'd be on pack trips, and there's a certain mountain in the Eagle Caps I won't name where one time I saw 29 mule deer in the summer, and most of them were bucks.
Yeah.
And my wife and I went back and hunted after a fresh snow during rifle buck season, and we cut like 3 tracks.
Right.
And, a long weekend of hunting.
How many lion tracks did you see?
I don't think we saw any lion tracks, but we saw 2 wolf tracks had come through. And the deer were all migrating, which doesn't help, but sometimes it can help if they migrate into you.
They're so easy to spot, though.
Yeah. In this fresh snow. Oh,
Yeah.
man. It's nice.
Huh.
But, yeah, the whitetails showing up in alpine areas. I was bow camped at 8,000 feet and had a whitetail. My camp buddy was a forked horn whitetail. I'd just sit in camp in the afternoon with my bow, and he'd come closer and closer and closer, and I'd pick up my bow, and he'd fade back into the timber. And like 3 or 4 times, I almost got that little sucker, but not quite.
What do you like about bow hunting?
I like the fact that it makes me gear down to a completely different gear than rifle hunting. You have to pay so much more attention to the little details, the minute, like where you're going to put every foot, how you're going to weave your way, duck under the branches and weave around the branches, the way that you're going to, you have to play the wind, and you almost kind of develop this sense, like 3-dimensional view in your mind's eye of the wind. It's going to be going down in this gully and up on that ridge and then down in this gully, and you have to stalk everything out or plan out every stalk, based on all those little factors. And it's almost like an altered state of consciousness when you get really into the zone on a stalk, or you're calling something and it's getting close. It is a truly heightened sense of awareness that, it's hard to get without substances or whatever. It's like a runner's high without exerting yourself, kind of. And I just really like that. It's like some people are adrenaline junkies, and I'm a bow hunting junkie.
So it's a forced proximity, like you have to get all that stuff right in order to get close enough.
Yeah.
What if you used a rifle and just said, I have to get within longbow range?
So I have done that before, and I enjoy that. Muzzleloader tags are a good opportunity to do that, and I hunt with an open-sighted 30-30 occasionally. But I think there's a factor of that I would like to get more into, like using, I've always been fascinated by antique vintage firearms, and I like wood and walnut, and I like old black powder cartridges and stuff. And I've always seen myself like getting a trapdoor Springfield or something and to hunt elk with, and getting really, really close. but it's not the equipment. It's the choice to get close to an animal.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm already making that choice by hunting with a 80-year-old rifle with a fixed 4-power scope on it. Like that's already definitely like 300 yards absolute maximum max. Like 300 yards is a long range shot for me.
It is a long range shot.
Yeah, it is.
Something that I've got a little bit of heartburn about is the work that I've done over the past, I don't know, 5 or 6 years with different companies in developing rifles and optics and stuff. We're producing ugly guns. Ugly guns. That
the chassis guns. I know you like one, so I'm not talking trash.
No, I love what they're capable of.
Yeah.
But a lot of times they're unpleasant to touch.
They don't feel good in your hand. They're not a companion on the trail. They're like a obstruction that you have to strap to yourself and carry. Like it's, you know what I mean? It's kind of like annoying to carry one versus like a pre-64 Model 70 in your hand. There's nothing like it. Like the warm feel of the wood, and
I think that a lot of it is that I grew up imagining beautiful guns and really wanting to own them. And I only ever owned one rifle that was truly beautiful, and I broke the stock on it.
Oh, jeez.
And I ended up having to replace it with a synthetic stock because that's what I could afford, and I didn't want it to break again.
Yeah.
But I grew up thinking and lusting after these carved metal and beautiful wood rifles, and
high grade walnut and checkering and good deep bluing
and if you ever get to hold a great rifle in your hands, with a carved stock, that's made out of a selected piece of wood, it feels like something that is completely missed with aluminum and polymer.
Yep.
So
I have a rifle. It's a Husqvarna. Most people probably didn't know that Husqvarna not only makes chainsaws but rifles back in the day,
and some great sewing machines.
Yeah,
they're all over the place.
But it was made in the 1940s, and it was imported from Sweden because the gun laws changed in Sweden, and a lot of people, they're limited to a certain amount of rifles. So a lot of people dumped some of their collection, and those ended up in the States, and I got one of them. And it has 25 kill notches on it, and it's either roe deer or moose, but I'm in my mind it's all 23 moose that were killed.
Sure.
And there's just something cool about that history. I'll never know who the man was or multiple people that made those notches, but it's really cool adding my own notches to it and continuing that legacy, and just very cool to me to like have something with some history.
Yeah, there is something that's very special about beautiful guns, and I hope that they never go away. I don't think that they ever will. I would love to see them come back, and the functionality, the ruggedness, the accuracy of some of these modern rifles is unparalleled.
Yeah.
Like, I can take some of these guns and we could drive out to the range right now, and I'd bet you a jelly donut that I'd hit on my first shot at 1,000 yards, which is it is a tough thing to do.
Yeah.
It gets talked about a lot more than it actually gets done, but I'd bet you a jelly donut that I could do it.
Yeah.
I could not do that with any of these pretty guns that I had before, but I do think that we can get to a point where we can get it all.
Yeah. Oh, it's totally possible, and people are doing it. I mean, you get the right bedding and the right trigger in a classic firearm, and you're getting the right barrel on it and the right loads and the right optics, you can do it.
You have to get it to fit you.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Right.
And that's what was largely missing in the guns that we grew up with, was they built them for one size, and humans are different sizes. Yep. Like you're like 8 feet tall, right? And I'm like 5 feet wide.
Yep.
Like we need different guns.
Yep. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Getting the cheek weld right and the length of pull and everything. It's definitely. But some guns like a Winchester Model 94 30-30, it's like whether you're fat or skinny or tall or wide or whatever, like you just do it, make it work,
Yeah, when you throw them up, those sights are there.
Yep, exactly. It's like pointing a shotgun, definitely.
And, they were built for guys who needed to shoot them like that.
Yeah.
Who were shooting at running animals at close range, and, they needed to build those guns so that they could come up and be right where they needed to be.
I was just looking at some old historic hunting photos of your Papa Doug. I believe that's your step-grandfather, right?
Yeah.
His father, Jidge Tippett. I
Yep.
have a really great photo. I should dig it out for you of him and Joe Bly and Pete Edgman, two other legendary old-timers, with 25 35s and 25 20s and 32 20s, which for people that don't know are like weak cartridges with 6-point bull elk.
Yeah.
It's like, how the heck did they take that thing? Maybe it took all three of them with all three guns. I don't know, but
yeah, probably wasn't pretty.
with like no more than a 22 mag powered rifle, you know.
Yeah, no.
They were happy to get their military surplus infield 30-06s when they finally came around, you know.
I would like to know more about Jidge. He's
oh man, I know a lot of his life
character.
story, like whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I work on, work the range that used to be his, and it's cool. There's the marks of him are still out there, There's wooden carved log troughs that he probably made that are still out there watering cows,
I mean, he amassed so much land.
Yeah.
During a time
30,000 acres.
More than that.
Was it?
It was a lot more than that.
Yeah.
Because he gave that much ground to every one of his sons.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's cool.
And starting in the early 1900s, after all the good stuff had been got, something goofy happened in there. I've got some theories about it, but I'm not going to talk about it yet.
Yeah, it's cool working his old range and looking at some of the old pictures and stuff. Even his daughters, too, Betty and Barbara, they were both phenomenal ranchers and cattle women themselves when they were younger, you know. Yeah.
Doug Barr.
Yeah.
Freaking. So I got I had my granddad's jet boat, the Doug Barr boat.
Yeah.
Which was 1958 Riddle, one of the first ever all welded aluminum boats. And I ran it in hells, even though I had no business doing that, but I did it and I survived. And I sold it. And it's been parked down there at Doug Barr. I sold it like 5 years ago. And I recently got a warning letter from the Forest Service for it being parked on Forest Service land for over 30 days.
It's like that thing lived on Forest Service land for 50 years,
Before it was Forest Service land.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Like the eminent domain took this land.
Yeah.
And
Doug Barr was deeded until the HGNRA, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, that was Papa Doug's place.
Yeah.
I mean, he grew up there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it just feels like such a gut punch to have that land get taken by the government, and then the boat that's longer than this deal that I've sold, even though, somehow the Forest Service tracked it down to my name still. Like now I'm getting a warning letter in the mail for that thing sitting there for 30 days. It just sticks in me.
Oh, man, with all the junk they've left all laying around all over the place, they're allowed to leave old haying equipment at Doug Barr, but you're not allowed to leave your boat, which isn't even yours.
Find something better to do, man.
Totally.
All right, Jordan, you're a handy guy. You make a lot of your own gear. What is a skill that you would like to see taught in high school to make kids more self-reliant? They all come out of it, knowing something about geometry. They know that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. They know a handful of other things that they may never use again. What is a hard skill that you've learned that you wish high school kids could learn?
So I think that game processing and butchery in general, not just game, but all animal, from killing the animal from slaughter to preparing, I think should be taught. Like, I'm not talking just home ec where you know how to cook a pot roast. I'm talking about like actually getting into it, gutting animals, like getting that connection with living animals and teaching kids to understand that their sustenance comes from other living beings would make the world a better place, I feel like,
Yeah.
A lot of the issues we're talking about with things like wolves and various hunting things we talk about, if people just had a better understanding of the true value of an animal's life, I think that the conversation would be different,
Yeah, a little bit more empathy and understanding for their food and where it comes from. And
People are used to driving around in a field and seeing a cow, and some of those people get pissed that the cow leaves a big cow patty and stinks up their campsite. But you and I being around it and pulling calves, and being around it and, babysitting cows all summer out on the range and all the stuff that goes into that cow's life and, the calves that she creates and those calves' lives going on and what they create and like really understanding all aspects of the animal itself, I think. So that kind of ties into like more like, ag class a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe ag class is the place to teach butchery,
Yeah. I think that's great.
But stuff like, welding is something that I learned when I was in shop class when I was a freshman, how to weld with just a regular old arc welder and 6011 rod. And just the other day, I spent several entire days welding new hay forks on a backhoe. And I learned that skill when I was in 9th grade. No one else taught it to me. That's where I learned it.
Yeah.
And I'm still using it. And it's huge. Like, saved thousands of dollars from hauling that machine to town to hire somebody to do it,
Yep. Yeah, this gate down here that I put in this summer, I don't have a welder, or I didn't. So I called around to my buddies who are welders, and of course they're real busy, and it just needed to get done. So I was like, man, I haven't welded since high school, but went and bought a welder, and it's still there. Like
I'm the same way.
I could still chase a little puddle around, and it's not that pretty. You don't want to look at it too close, but it's not going to fall off either.
No. Yeah, I did exactly the same thing, and I had the additional challenge of no access to electricity when I was working on this backhoe, so I had to bring the electricity to the backhoe. So I literally got a Lincoln arc welder out of a junkyard, and just picked it out of someone's junk pile, and we got a nice generator we use on the ranch, and I had to make my own adapter cord because the welder's from 1925 and the generator's from 2022, so I had to make my own adapter cord, and I googled like how to make this adapter cord, and it was like, do not attempt to make this cord, like if you screw it up, like it's gonna burst into flames and be really bad. I was so nervous when I flipped that switch. It turned the welder on, and it fired up, and no flames came shooting out. So I said, all right, we're good,
Yeah.
Started welding.
I had the same problem. All these California compliant plugs, they don't fit anything anymore. And it's like, come on.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's great advice. I would love to see something like that happen, and, for you young folks that are listening, there's plenty of people out there who are more than willing to take all the time in the world out of their own lives to teach you something, if only you show up and show interest. And you just don't know when that skill is gonna be needed, but you're gonna appreciate it when you have it.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. Where can people follow along in the adventures of Jordan Manley?
So you can just look my name up on Facebook and follow along. I have public Facebook, and then you can follow me on Instagram, which is Walk Talk It.
Yeah, which is a good way to describe you. And this will give you a glimpse into what it looks like to be a cowboy in the West today, in an unsentimental way. Like it ain't Yellowstone, it's real life. This is how it is, and if you've got any kind of question, I'm sure Jordan would be happy to answer it. So thank you, sir, for your time. Thanks for your stories, and it's fun to catch up.
Yep. Thank you, James.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you all very much for listening. I'm going to keep bringing you these stories from normal people just like you who have done extraordinary things. Everyone is an expert at something, and they have interesting perspectives on life and work and the environment and all of the things that we care about. I'm going to keep bringing that to you. And I want to thank you so much for making this show possible. I also want to thank Emily Bratcher for producing this show. She does a great job editing. Really appreciate her. I want to thank John Chatelain. He did the art for the Six Ranch podcast. And Celia, soon to be Harlander, she digitized that so that we can get it out there on the internet for you. Also want to thank Justin Hay for writing this original music and the beautiful whistling that you're listening to right now.
You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Please keep listening to the show. Write me a review if you feel like it, and just keep doing your thing, and we'll all learn from this together. It's been fun, and we're just getting started.